Hello and welcome to Ed Talk. This is the show that discusses topics that impact our schools here in Nevada County. I'm Scott Lay, Nevada County Superintendent of Schools. With me today, I'm very excited, Toby Guevin. We are here from Nevada County Public Health, and we're going to talk about kind of two heavy subjects, I would say, but super important not only for our schools, but in our community, how they interact. The first one, we're going to talk about suicide prevention, and then the opioid overdose prevention, and all the efforts that you've been working on, and then how you've got the schools involved to keep our kids safe. So, Toby, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here, and I know the two topics, as you mentioned, that we're talking about are heavy, but I think it's great that we're talking about them because they're so important for educators, for parents, for students to be familiar with.
Absolutely, and you've done a great job. People in the community may have already heard it, of getting that word out there, what we look for, things. So we're going to go through those, and specifically how what we're doing in the schools to deal with these topics, because we all know ignoring them, looking the other way is the worst possible thing we could do. Dealing with it head on is the way to go. But first, Toby, what's your role in NCPH?
Yeah, so I work for Nevada County Public Health Department. I'm a program manager for the Health and Wellness Division. So we have 7 community health education and primary prevention programs. Among those are our suicide prevention and mental health work, as well as our alcohol and other drug use prevention, which includes our opioid overdose prevention work.
Right, so absolutely critical in our county here. And we'll start off September. Perfect time that we're doing the show here. It is a suicide prevention month. So what are we doing? How are you getting the word out there and then, impacting the schools?
Yeah, definitely. So September is Suicide Prevention Month, and it's a really great opportunity to raise awareness about suicide prevention and mental health resources that are available in our community. And it's a really great time to learn about those topics. And so, we work really closely with the schools in all of the work we do. Last year in May for Mental Health Matters Month, we actually developed a new campaign called Mental Health Matters Nevada County. It is a campaign that's really focused on bringing all of those different resources, all of that information into one website where you can check out available services in our community. You can learn about how do I get help if I'm struggling with something or I know somebody who's struggling with something. And then also educational resources so that, if you want to learn more about suicide prevention or learn more about mental health, we also have resources like curated videos, access to trainings, things of that nature so people can learn as much as they can. And we're also working directly with a lot of schools on some programming for this month. So we have some schools where we're doing some high schools where we're doing know the signs training. So students and staff can learn about, what are those warning signs of suicide or that somebody might be struggling with their mental health. How do we connect with somebody that we're concerned with? And then most important, what are those resources in our community where there are professionals and folks who are there to support people who are struggling?
Right. And I think a lot of times in our schools, it's so important to see those signs. You think at a younger age or even high school, like that's not going to happen. But unfortunately it does. And more so in high school when you get there. So it's great where you're doing that. You have the resource. That webpage you discussed, it is, I'm imagining, on Nevada County Public Health's website. Is it a standalone webpage as well?
Yeah, it's actually a standalone website. Okay. So you can get there 2 different ways. It's kind of a long name, mentalhealthmattersnc.com. So we shortened it a little bit, and you can also go to mhmnc.com, and you'll find all of those resources. Public health and behavioral health worked really closely to develop the website. But we also worked really closely with our partners, including Nevada County Superintendent of Schools. We worked with individual schools. We worked with the A-Team, which is a group of counselors at the schools, to kind of vet the website, make sure we weren't missing any resources. Right. And if you go on there, you can actually go to Youth in Schools, and it lists out every health and wellness page that there is at each school and school district within Nevada County to try to make sure that people have access to those resources. So it's a great site. We definitely recommend people checking it out. And there's a lot of time, energy, and effort that went into making it hopefully the best site that we could.
Yeah, and it's a very good site for our listeners. If you go there, like you said, it's got tremendous amount of resources. Very useful on that. Now, going back to the schools and what you're doing with the Suicide Prevention Month, Do you have some like specific examples, and what does that look like? Or is it like a rally, in the multi-purpose room? Is it individual classroom work? Is it the counselors working with students? How does that work, and how do you, what do you do? What do you and your team do when that rolls out?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it really depends on the school. We want to be responsive to the needs of the school and to the needs of the individual students. So it can look like a lot of different things. In some instances, I know we're working on right now with Nevada Union, I know the Signs program that will be at night, where we can do a training there for parents and for students who are interested. We are working with Guevin on doing a series of trainings for their students. We go into a lot of different schools. Sometimes it's even smaller group meetings. But when we meet with students in particular, what we're really trying to do is highlight what are those major kind of warning signs that we're looking for. And sometimes we actually talk about those as invitations, right? Because when people are struggling or they're in pain, they oftentimes reach out and they give us signs for how they might be struggling. So being able to notice those, and when we're working with students, we're really focused on, okay, once you know those signs, reaching out and connecting with friends or finding a caring adult that you trust, that you can go to share your concerns. So even if you don't feel comfortable approaching somebody, asking how they're doing or checking in on them, letting them know why you might be a little bit concerned, having those trusted adults in our lives where we can connect those students to those adults, and then from there to whatever resource makes sense, that is really key. And the good news is that at our schools, we have so many of those caring adults, whether it's a teacher, a coach, a counselor, an administrator. There's a lot of different folks that are there on the campus that can help out in those situations. So we're really trying to make sure students are aware of that and are thinking about it in advance so that they don't just have to react in the moment. They can actually think, okay, I'm reaching out to my friend who I'm concerned about. What I'm going to do is if they need additional help, I'm going to connect them to the school counselor who I trust a lot.
Right. And I know in our schools, we encourage, and it happens in all schools, that every student has that adult to talk to. Like you said, it could be the receptionist. When you walk into school that morning, they notice, hey, something's a little bit off with this student. What's going on? Key people in. Could be the person in the lunchroom. They notice that. Absolutely. It could be your school security walking around. So it's everybody trained on that. Like you said, it's so important they find that person they trust. And that's up to them, and how they figured that out doesn't matter as long as they come up with that person. So, as we look through that, what are, there are warning signs in that, and what are those? If, you were to come up and say, hey, these are the things you really need to look for. What would those be? Yeah,
I mean, what we call kind of like the critical warning signs are really talking about death and suicide. And so when we think about talking, we're really talking about not just speaking, but also communicating. So some students may be doing it in drawing or writing or things of that nature. However we have to communicate, really being aware of that. If somebody talks about death or suicide and they mention a plan or any type of thought that's going into carrying that
elevates the concern, doesn't it?
It elevates the concern a lot. So those critical warning signs are really ones where we want to reach out immediately and connect that person to a caring adult or one of the resources that we have in our community. And we've got some great ones. I mean, we have the 24/7 mobile crisis unit, which is available, 530-265-5811. Again, 24/7 mobile crisis, clinical professionals in the community that can come out and help out.
Do that, right. And something, you mentioned a little bit ago, the connections. One of the things we always look for, that student that's sitting by themselves in a lunchroom, doesn't seem to have any friends. Make sure you're connecting with that student. Come up to them, how you doing? Build up a rapport with them so they know there's a trusted person out there, someone who cares about them. Every single day when they walk on that campus, somebody's there, they matter, we care. And going on with your resources, which are great. And this is something, I've been doing, I think it's 33, 34 years of education now here in Nevada County. And when we started off, this wasn't talked about. Suicide was one of those things that were kind of a hush. I don't think anybody really knew how to deal with it. We didn't know how to respond. And it's been really good over the years as you've seen it come out, and it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to deal with it and look out. Only good can come from it. That stigma is going away, which is wonderful with that.
Yeah, and that's really what we're trying to do with the website as well. I mean, that stigma keeps us from reaching out. I mean, if you think about it, for a lot of us, like we haven't had those open and honest conversations about suicide, right? And that's something as adults that we can model for young people as well, is having those open and honest conversations, creating those communication channels.
Yeah.
You mentioned, that sense of connection that's so important. That's really like, a lot of people ask us, how do I tell whether a student's just showing kind of typical teen behavior versus not? And one of the things that we really look for are those connections. So it may be that their interests are changing or their friend groups are changing, but do they still have friends that they're connecting with? Do they still have other interests, right, that give us that sense of connecting, that sense of belonging, that sense of purpose? And so when somebody's isolating themselves or withdrawing from those connections, that's another one of those key signs. So it is really important, that we help destigmatize, and that's why we called it Mental Health Matters, right? Because we really wanted to be on the forefront of claiming that and really saying, this is something that's important. So many of us have struggled with it. Let's open up those lines of communications. Let's learn more about those resources and how we as a entire community can be better prepared.
Right. And we know, during COVID, we always keep referring during COVID, we go back to that, but that was such a watershed moment for all of us and in the schools tremendously. But I think we noticed a lot more suicide thoughts when kids were either at home being isolated, these social animals, and they couldn't come to school. That was horrible for them. And then we bring them back and people were still mixed messages with everything going on. It seems to have really taken off then, and our focus is getting better and better of helping those students and staff members.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we just talk about students, but you've also got to look at the staff and even parents, saying, hey, I think that person looks a little overwhelmed and behavior is changing, in our small schools up here in Nevada County, we're lucky. We get to know each other very, very well. And that's a benefit, huge benefit when it comes to this.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we have done over the years is also work with NCSOS and work with our schools to train staff members and to train administrators and to train front office staff, right? The front office staff are often the ones who have the best pulse on what's happening. Yeah. And so really, yes, creating a community where we're aware of suicide. We know how to engage with people we're concerned about, even if they're not thinking about suicide, to connect with them, to make sure that they feel that sense of connection and that people are looking out for them. That is so critical. And then again, if we do have somebody who's thinking about suicide, right? As you mentioned before, that happens, at a frequency that, that is much higher than maybe we previously thought now that we have research around it. And so really knowing those resources to connect, students, staff, family members, community members too, where they can get that help is really, really critical.
Right. Statistically, where are we, Nevada County, compared to other rural counties? Because, when I compare us, I don't look to us to anything in Sacramento County, the big counties, the urban counties. I look at rural counties. So where are we with that?
Yeah, I mean, typically we're, as you mentioned, like we oftentimes get questions about, what is the suicide rate or how does it compare with other counties? We want to be looking at similar counties, and we're kind of unique actually in Nevada County in terms of what our demographic profile is, and we're overrepresented in a lot of the groups that are kind of priority populations that we want to be focusing on. And so some really encouraging news is in the last 2 years, we've seen two of the lower numbers of suicide deaths in our community in 2022 and 2023. And so I feel like we're aware, we're making progress. And the more people we can train, the more people who can be aware of the resources, the more people that can go to mentalhealthmattersnc.com, the more suicides we can prevent and connect people who are thinking about suicide to those resources that can prevent those suicides from happening.
Right, and that's great that we're lower. I'm sure, our goal obviously is zero.
Yeah.
We don't want anybody to be in that position and be able to help them all. Anything else that you're doing for this Suicide Prevention Month with different community meetings? Anything else we haven't touched on you want to let our audience know about before we jump into our next topic?
Yeah, so we'll also be doing some publicly available Know the Signs training. So in the Know the Signs trainings, what we talk about are, as I mentioned before, what are the warning signs of suicide? How do you start a conversation with somebody? Let's say you notice some of these signs and you want to talk to somebody. How do you get that start? What's that intro?
Yeah.
How do you kind of talk to somebody about it? And then what are the resources we have locally at the national level? 988 recently, 2 years ago in July, they switched over to 988 as the National Suicide Lifeline to make it easily recognizable and easy to remember. So thinking about how we connect people to those resources. So we'll be doing those. Nevada County, their Facebook page, will be posting the dates once we have them confirmed. They'll be happening later in the month. But we have a lot of activities happening during the month. We're really excited to meet the needs of the schools, meet the needs of other organizations. We're doing we do a lot of organizational know the signs. So if you and your organization either want a first time know the signs or a refresher on knowing the signs of suicide, please feel free to reach out to us at Public Health, and we're happy to accommodate that. All of our trainings are always free.
Right, great, fantastic. Well, let's jump right into the next topic, opioid overdose prevention, which again, I love it. These are all prevention. What can we do to stop that? Because we know there's an opioid, I'm not pronouncing that word right for some reason, epidemic.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, in America right now, in California, and so we want to stop that. So you've also got a campaign with that. You want to tell our audience the name of that one? It's got a great name too.
Oh, well, thank you. We've started a campaign called No Overdose Nevada County. There's a website which is nooverdosnc.com. It's KNOW overdosenc.com. But if you do type in overdose.com, it also goes to it. Yeah,
good.
nooverdosnc.com, also a mouthful. And so really with that, as you alluded to, we are having kind of an unparalleled opioid overdose epidemic in the United States. In the most recent data from the CDC, the leading cause of death for U.S. adults between the ages of 18 to 45 is accidental overdose as a result of fentanyl. So fentanyl is a very strong synthetic opioid. It's found in a lot of different drugs, so it's laced in other drugs. As a result, we're seeing that increase. And so what we really want to be doing, I think, are a few things. You mentioned prevention, right? We want to make sure that we're educating young people and other folks in our community, about what is fentanyl, what makes it, what has made it so lethal, and then what are the steps that we can take to either, not start using it all, or if we know people, who are going to parties or who are using in the community, making sure that they have access to Narcan or naloxone, which is the opioid overdose reversal medication, which can reverse an overdose and has really saved hundreds of lives just here in Nevada County. Making sure that people have easy access to that is really, really important. And so that's been one of the priorities for the campaign. So we want to prevent people from using at all, but then make sure that people are really saving lives if people are using in the community.
Yeah, and you mentioned fentanyl, how it's in other things. And so people maybe think they're taking one thing and they don't know it's been laced with fentanyl.
Yep.
And how deadly it is even for first responders.
Yeah.
With the powder, that. So
yeah,
talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, totally. So what we've seen it in here locally is we've seen it in counterfeit pills. So we've actually had incidents where there have been parties that involve young people where we have had folks thought that they were taking a Percocet or a Xanax because there's pill presses that look exactly the same. And so if you take those pills and you're not getting them from a prescribed physician, if you don't know and you didn't see where those were coming from, we tell people, make sure that any pill that you're taking is one that was prescribed by your pharmacist. But, so being careful of that. And then we've also found it in other drugs like MDMA, methamphetamine here locally, and other drugs. So again, even if somebody doesn't know they're taking an opioid, it's possible for them to get it in their system. And so one of the things that you mentioned was, the danger to first responders. Now that we've had more time with fentanyl, it actually doesn't absorb through the skin. So that's one of the things that we train people on. That's why they spent millions of dollars, pharmaceutical companies, developing those patches that help it get through the skin. And so we really want people not to be concerned about that when they're responding to an overdose, because we want them to use Narcan. And so using Narcan, we do a training. There's a training on the website. It's just like if you're using, Claritin or a nasal spray. You just have a plunger, you put it in the person's nose and you press it. It's a liquid, it comes out. You want their head tilted back. But really, like if somebody's unconscious, we tell people, don't play detective, right? If you're at a party, somebody's not responding, give them Narcan because it can't hurt somebody.
Right, that was my next question. Drawbacks to it.
Yeah, there really are no drawbacks from using Narcan.
Right.
It does not have kind of adverse effects if you're not having an overdose. And so we really encourage people, again, you may say, oh, well, my friend was just taking a pill. They've taken that pill all the time. It's not an opioid, or you may not think it's an opioid. There's so many different types of opioids out there. And so really don't play detective. We say, if you're shaking somebody's shoulder, if you're trying to rouse them, they're unconscious, they're not responsive. We also ask people to look for like maybe blue or gray fingertips or lips, which is a sign of a lack of oxygen.
Right.
Because when somebody overdoses on opioids, what it does is impact the opioid receptors in the body. It slows down breathing. And if you overdose, you're getting too many and it can just shut down breathing. Right. And so the Narcan actually comes in, it knocks the opioids temporarily off of the opioid receptor, and it allows that person to begin breathing again. And that's the key, is getting that oxygen to that person's lungs, to their body, and eventually to their brain, right? Because brain damage is what we're really concerned about.
Yeah, and the Narcan being in schools.
Yep.
I remember when it first came out, we were like, wait a minute, we're gonna give out something to kids, what we've always been like not to. But now we understand schools out there, they stock it, they're ready for it. Staff are trained on how to use it.
We've done trainings for the vast majority of schools here. We've actually done multiple trainings in some instances for schools that we trained a couple years ago. And there's actually legislation at the state level that just passed that requires schools to have it there in case of an emergency on campus. And so it's really important. There's trained staff there. We've been doing, last year in 2023, we trained 99 organizations, including schools, and more than 2,300 people in Nevada County. And so a lot of people are familiar with it, more people are learning. And as you mentioned, there's a really strong stigma around it initially. Absolutely. And it's really important that we fight through that stigma, because the most important thing we can do is that make sure that if somebody's having an overdose in our community, which again, right, leading cause of death among US adults between the ages of 18 and 45, we want somebody trained and with Narcan who can respond. Right. So think of it in your first aid kit. Think about it as just like you would with CPR, right? You want to get trained. You want to be a helper in the community who can save a life potentially.
Right. And there's no drawback to it.
No drawback.
Yeah, so why not? Have it, be ready, be trained on it, anybody. With that going on, so, I'm looking, just these two big programs that are going on, that the impact for our youth and our community are huge. Yeah. In the positive manner. So before we close, let's go through the website again for the opioid overdose prevention is NoOverdoseNC.com. So KNOW OverdoseNC.com. You can go there. You can find out where in our local community you can get Narcan. Right? We've actually trained up 15 to 20 organizations locally who now have Narcan on the premises. Who have it available. So if you go to Briar Patch, for instance, you can go to the customer service desk and you can ask for Narcan right there. So we're trying to create those access points. There's also information about overdose prevention best practices. So we talked a little bit about, somebody being unresponsive or having blue lips or blue fingernails from a lack of oxygen. What are some of those warning signs or those overdose prevention or overdose awareness signs that we want to be mindful of? And then we also have training videos that go through Narcan. They talk about, the national data, the local data. What are opioids? What are fentanyl? What is fentanyl? What are some of those common opioids that we probably don't even know that they're opioids, right? And so we have that information there. More than 30 organizations cross-sector are supporters of No Overdose NC. And so it's been really nice to see local hospitals, local schools, local community-based organizations, local businesses who are all kind of getting together to raise awareness and to support the community when it comes to overdose prevention. Right. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, that's both those fantastic information and websites for both suicide prevention and opioid overdose prevention. It's just a great program and such a positive impact on our county here. So Toby, thank you so much for being our guest today, coming out here and talking to us about these two critical topics. I want to thank our audience. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.